Hello, everyone. So this is Shane, and we're going to have this meeting today held in the ARM offices, which is nice in Cambridge here. This is a typical meeting of North America and Europe once a month. Chris has been running these meetings when I'm in Japan, but I'm also here today as decoration. I'll be running through the antitrust policy notice, and then I will very quickly.
Recording in progress.
Ooh, really? I think that's the wrong one, Andrew. So Matthew is dialing in to the meeting as well, but he's going to, I think, just stay here and I'll share in the screen internally. So I'm going to do the antitrust policy. I'll do the news and whatnot for the group, and we will then have the discussion about editing the specs, which will, as usual, be led by Chris. So the first point is we have our antitrust policy notice. The full antitrust policy is on the Linux Foundation website. And you can, of course, if you're from a member company, talk to our counsel, Andy Updegrove. The agenda today is the same as it always is. We're going to work on the standards and core material. After we have some news, there's a space to look at or work on the reference and supporting material. There's any other business and a close of meeting. For those of you who are new, most of what we do is this, working on the standards and core material. We're drafting what might become future updates. The work on reference and supporting material is existent, but mostly we do that on the education work calls separately because the main spec stuff takes a lot of time. Speaking of which, we're going to dive straight into the news so that we don't take up all the time we could use for editing our specs. There's a bunch of project meetings this week that are going to be global. So basically, we've just had an AI study group monthly workshop. It was 2 hours long, lots of discussion, a lot done there, and great contributions. This is our monthly North America Europe call. Tomorrow, our automation work group is meeting. Oliver from Siemens will be hosting that. And then we have 2 meetings of the telco work group on Thursday with Mark Eton, our chair, hosting those. Of course, we also have regional meetings of various types occurring. This is a non-exhaustive list. You can find all of the meetings occurring on the LFX platform listed on the OpenChain website. So it's openchain.org/participate. Some little bits of news. One of the most interesting, I suppose, is quite simply, we have a lovely new case study. BlackBerry have created a new case study about how they've been using ISO 5230. This comes hot on the heels of BlackBerry announcing recertification efforts on 5230 and 18974. They were an early adopter of both, and they were going through their 18-month cycle to recertify. The case study is designed as a document that will hopefully help companies throughout the supply chain understand how and why a company like BlackBerry is using our ISO standard. Very kind contribution from them. Another bit of news that might be interesting is that we had a little bit of a workshop in Japan, and that was focused on what's going on in China. We had a bunch of people come over from something called OpenEuler, and that's a project hosted under the Open Atom Foundation, which is roughly equivalent to something like Android. So OpenEuler has over 30% of the server market in China. It's got over 500 projects and 17,000 developers. What's interesting, and the reason we had a case study, is that they started using ISO 5230 as the foundation for their ecosystem license compliance. And they're in the adoption cycle for ISO 18974, our security standard. So that's nice. And they've committed to turning all of the presentations from the workshop into more written case studies. So many case studies. Why, you ask? Well, because the community said they would like them. Right, on to our favorite part. It's the Chris gets to work part of the meeting. We have had a very productive couple of weeks. The last North America Asia call has been published. I'll just put the link in the chat. A couple of issues were closed in that time. When we were working on those issues at the last call in Asia and North America, or previously a month ago, North America, Europe, the idea is to close off the legacy issues around our ISO standards as we draft the potential next generation. And by closing off the legacy issues, we create some more space for when the public comment periods open before we freeze the proposed updates. There are still plenty of open issues. Well, plenty, I say. Security has around 10 open issues and licensing has 3 remaining. These are something that we've reduced substantially, thanks mostly to Chris driving this very hard in the last couple of months. And this call, we have a couple of items to close off based on previous work. And some of these, the first few, are essentially something we probably are ready to close and were deferred at the end of the last meeting due to time constraints and pushed into this meeting to ensure that the previous audience that looked at them would have a chance to look once more. Right. Chris, as you potentially dig into these, do you want to share the screen or how would you like to run this today? Chris is currently muted. In case Chris,
I
there we go.
just love Zoom and all these other things. There we go. There's all my buttons are on now. Since if you've already got the repository up, you can go ahead and share it since you're sharing right now,
I
and
will do so.
we will talk through it.
Okay, so I'll share and we will talk through it from there. The first one is 18. Let me pull this up. 29, so 18. So the first item, I'm going to share the screen and show this. The first item is security assurance specification, and it's related to rewording section 315. There's a proposal to reword the paragraph. You should have the link for that, but I'll just paste it into the chat once more. This proposal led to some discussion. Chris mentioned that is it okay to ignore development processes which may allow vulnerabilities? Then we discussed that on the meeting. And the conclusion of the discussion was some proposed new language. The question was, in replacing this existing language with this new language, because the discussion took place on the North America Asia call, we didn't have our European participants to let us know if they liked the proposed changes. And what we have to do, therefore, is request that you look at the existing versus the proposed new language, and you let us know if it's acceptable or not. Chris, I believe that's the essentially what we have to do, give this audience a chance to look at it. And correct me if I'm wrong, if there's no objections, then we proceed to merge the new language in the draft. Is that correct?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, giving everyone a minute to look at it. Any comments, questions, concerns?
Primarily what we did is added in a little bit more emphasis on the security aspects of developing software other than just looking for published known vulnerabilities post-release. And I mean, we could go on and on, but I think we just need to have some ask in our spec that says that you're doing that kind of thing. You're doing that kind of scanning.
And I suppose one way to also describe this is that um, we try, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, the proposed new language also tries to structure just the language, just the wording, in a way that might be easier for people to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we could down there in that third bullet up from the bottom where it says conducting continuous and repeated security testing for all software before release, we could put both static and dynamic testing uh, just to catch those things that aren't known vulnerabilities, but they've been introduced into your software through development. And so I just would maybe suggest that we put static and dynamic testing in parentheses or something without specifying, any tools or anything.
I have a suggestion for this. To to avoid making the spec itself larger, perhaps what we could do, this is just an idea, we could add to the definitions section a definition that security testing uh, includes static and dynamic analysis. And this would allow us to keep this language relatively short, but when
Yep,
people double check what is security testing, because it's capitalized, they'd quickly essentially be flagged that it should encompass these items.
absolutely.
It seems like no one has any objections. Um,
Question.
sorry.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you read over these new proposed new ones, many of these sentences are starting with something ing, you see, monitoring, communicating, analyzing, conducting, blah, blah, blah. And the first two sentences are why is not like identifying or detecting instead.
Oh, well spotted. No reason at all, I think. Um, yeah. Okay, so, we can potentially identifying. Okay.
And then in the end of these sentences, shall we have this dot or not?
Oh, right. You mean full stop.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, technically, and this is a question. I mean, technically, for native English, we should probably do this for bullet points, but we'd have to double check the ISO format.
I'm done.
Well caught. I saw Chris had another note. Okay. So Chris had another note, which is no mention of structural threats to the software that are the result of poor programming techniques.
Well, that's in 315 there.
Yeah.
To identify structural and technical threats to the supplied software.
Okay.
And technical threats, a lot of times people just think of the CVEs as the technical threats, but they're really not. Due to if you practice secure programming and you follow the NIST framework for that, you would identify both the structural tests from your programming errors that are resident in the software that you created, as well as the technical threats, which could be detected by either CVEs or by dynamic testing, where somebody's slipped a piece of malware into your build process that you didn't know about. And they'd see activity going on from the application as it's running in the dynamic test that they would not be expecting, and that would be their call for it. That's my long explanation for that.
Do you think we need to add another piece to this, or we adequately cover it with secure software development? And we could perhaps define secure software development further in the definition section to cover secure programming techniques.
Yeah, personally, I think by moving both of those up for a little bit more work in the definition section, that would probably handle it, because then people could go back up and take a look at it.
Yeah. Secure programming techniques.
So thanks for pointing that out.
No, it's great. As usual, we're barreling through this stuff effectively. Let's see. I needed to put something else. Oh, security testing. Security testing. Oh, so that should be first. Security testing include.
Static and dynamic.
Oh, thank you. Okay, brilliant. In that case, thanks to Mary and Chris, it looks like we're closed. It's my job to merge. Issue dead. Well done, all. The next one. Right. Gosh.
Hey, Shane, just a quick thing on that part with regards to the security testing. You have added the static and dynamic analysis test. I'm kind of wondering, should we also mention secret key scanning as well? Obviously, a lot of software do use keys. It could be ranging from anything pertaining to PK, TLS, PKIs, keys to code signing. So I'm kind of wondering, like, should we include secret key validation as well, along with the static and dynamic, which I would presume it is specific to the software. But in the case of, let's say, services, cloud services, you are bound to also have the secret keys to be validated, right?
Yeah, if you find a secret key in the source code that you're scanning, that shouldn't be there. Period. That's something that we look for all the time, to see if there's any secret keys that somebody's embedded in the software just to automate their process. And the key's already there, and so it can just run through it. But that is bad programming policy.
Yeah.
Let me look in the NIST framework for secure software development and see if that's already covered in there. Because I think if we just put a reference to, secure programming, and then, for example, the NIST, and then give them the number for the secure development process, that might help cover all of those little things. What do you think?
I always feel if we can avoid overlap by providing reference to others, we've had a win.
Yeah. I don't mind using that, just to making sure that, yes, secret keys, because usually large organizations, especially when it comes to the services, they do SAST which is the static analysis test, solution test, and the dynamic analysis solution test separately, and then secret keys are done as a separate exercise. But I do agree that, yeah, some aspects of secret key validation, you will do that as part of your static analysis, but there could be other services that are in place where there are no source code involved at all. This could be even keys embedded in a firmware, or keys embedded in a hardware. Then those needs to be validated using a separate exercise or separate process, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. So that's why I was kind of hoping that, maybe in the security testing, we can just include another term saying, hey, static and dynamic analysis solution tests and secret key validations, or maybe we'll have to treat that as a separate activity or separate, or we can try to see if we can combine that, if that is what you're proposing. Because we need to bring in that aspect of secret key scanning or secret key validation within the security testing context, right?
Okay, let me take a look at the NIST framework and see what it says, and if it's kind of light on that, we'll add it in.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, excellent. The next one, and I think I've already posted it in the chat. Triage entry to specific situations where vulnerability is not applicable. So this one's a bit thorny in that there's lots of talking. But rather than relitigating the full thing, we actually have completed this in that Chris got it to the stage where we would be changing the language from an original into a new set of language. And I'll just show you the original. It's up a bit. It's in the spec 332. And it's about what security assurance is. And the proposed new language is third comment from last. It would be as follows, and I'll see if I can just copy paste all of this into the chat. So one line deleted, and then I think, just copying and pasting into the chat for ease of reading. So 332 would have the old language, essentially the first line put it upwards a little bit into a descriptor of the context of the process for security assurance, that line deleted, and then a series of improved language to describe things like assigning risk scores and having remediation steps. So this is finessing the existing security assurance language. And just in case someone is in the middle of wondering what that language is and doesn't have access to the spec, I am going to put that language into the chat. It will come in two parts because it's a little long. And please bear in mind that language is now depreciated. We're looking at fully replacing it with the shorter, more compact version above. Because it might take a minute to read, I'm going to suggest we pause for, say, 2 minutes to give people a chance to read. Just to reiterate, the top one posted first is the new language. The longer set below is the old language we're looking at replacing. And the question in play is, given that this was already litigated and discussed, is it okay to close this issue with that new language? We're 2 minutes in, so I'm just going to write here. That we're planning to use the new language to replace old language. I'm going to copy paste the old language from above here. And I'm going to grab the latest version of the new language much further down in the thread here. I'll add the formatting. Right. Trying to find the formatting of the old language. Dear gosh. Okay. This was literally just every line. So it seems that the new language is both more concise and much more easily readable, which is good. Everyone has had approximately 3 minutes to read the difference between the old and the new. Do you have any objections with this language?
Oh, you took the attributions out of it, though.
Did I?
Yeah, you took Copernicat out of there.
Oh, of the change? Yeah.
I saw okay, I saw the name and I was like, oh, is this, I couldn't figure if it was Copilot working for me or what was happening.
Do you want me to copy paste you into the actual ISO standard?
No, it's
No.
That seems excessive,
I was-
Mary.
I was making a technical legal joke.
That's a tough one. I appreciate it. I like the new language. I feel like it's less prescriptive, which is always our goal, right? But yeah, not non-controversial, sounds like.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be key, right? The language looks simpler. It looks, as you said, it feels less prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
Just seems like the perfect solution to improve on what we had before.
Agree. Good updates.
Okay. Okay, in that case, I'll just say, done. That's the second issue and second update to the language today. Nice. Goodness, we're really cooking here. Okay. Next one is issue 38 on, this would be a licensing spec. Andrew noticed there was no requirement for documenting that a training program exists. So we do talk about having a training program. It seems we lacked evidence. Oh, yes, we said assessed competence. And Andrew said it is difficult if there's only verification material for assessments as opposed to the training and assessment policy itself, which is an interesting point. Okay. Then it was raised that the current version might cover the topic. Oh, sorry, Chris, you go ahead, I'm afraid.
No, we just, both Andrew and Mark had comments on it, so I just was basically going back to make sure that we had covered their comments adequately in that proposed version that we'd looked at.
And what I'll do is I will pull up the current draft of the future licensing spec and try to see if we have covered training adequately. So I should just rephrase. If we've covered training in a way that appears to address their concerns. Okay, so Andrew's concern was that while the competence is assessed, the training program itself is not necessarily recorded, what the training program is. So here we have the competence on the basis of appropriate training. A documented procedure that makes all participants aware of the existence of a policy by, for instance, training. Policy.
Well, wasn't that one specifically talking about contribution policy?
No, Andrew's one was just saying that we should have, or do you mean the thing in the actual spec?
Yes, the training comment that you went through.
I'll pull that back. My apologies.
It's right next to it. It's not within contribution. It's just
just next to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
contribution is really short.
Okay, so we have two items, one under competence that people will be appropriately trained, and then we have under contribution that people know what the policy is, the open source policy is. In this sense, we seem to be requiring that there's training, but not documenting the training itself. Okay. So Andrew wants us to have a training and assessment policy, a requirement for a training and assessment policy, which is slightly different from having an open source policy, which we do require. So this is because we assess the outcomes, but we don't say the outcomes of what. There's no verification required.
Oh, Andrew's not on the call, but I'm not sure what he means by assessment policy. Does he mean process actually instead of policy?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I like the idea of leaving it flexible. I'm the one who creates trainings for engineers, and so I don't, feel like I need to take my own training since I wrote it. But so I think it's nice to be flexible.
Yes.
I'm not sold yet on this.
How about? Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I think what he really wanted to see was that during the assessment for someone's competence, that there's also a note in there about what training material was provided, or he wanted some kind of documentation, just a requirement that they have it available if somebody comes to audit them, because anybody can say that so-and-so, I assessed them and they're competent and therefore they're doing the job. But you don't say what they're competent at because there wasn't any training material.
Well,
So it's just show.
I guess the fact of my continued employment shows that, or that my boss has fired me. It shows my competence, I guess.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
I
why.
think that might go in the US, in countries where it's a lot harder to get fired. And I think that argument might not hold as much weight.
Yeah, and we're not trying to pin somebody down so they get fired, but what we're saying is in the spec, I think what he was getting at was that when somebody wants to when somebody's running through their annual audit of their compliance to the process, that they not only have to show that they've said someone was competent, but that they also have some kind of documentation to produce, training documentation that said, they have at least these skills and abilities.
Yeah.
And that's how I assessed that they were competent. It's not, let's OpenChain create a policy or a training process document, but rather that, which you've already got the training reference material out there, but rather that we're just saying that when the assessors come through, you should be able to produce documentation of the training to which you assess their competence to, or by which you assess their competence. And I know that's not the right legal way to word that, but
I was gonna say, I'm not sure that's not how I read Andrew's comment.
yeah, and that's why we asked for him to provide
Yeah.
us some feedback, but
Okay.
So
we haven't received it. And it's been a month since we put that out there.
in a month, indeed. How about I add one more comment to Ping here, and I also email him direct. And if we don't get something back, we'll consider the issue dead. But if he does have something back, I've asked him to, give us some example of what might be useful and where in the spec to allow us more specifically to discuss it and whether we think it crosses a line into too much detail or it solves a problem we have in terms of the spec itself. What do you think? In essence, then it's saying, how about we defer this while I chase Andrew?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll try to make sure we get to a position where we can close this one because, it's interesting he's hit a market challenge on it where people are saying, I want this. But sample sizes matter. We need more information for us to be able to judge it on a broader scale. Because what if it is, for instance, a UK specific thing?
Right.
What if in the US, as Mary said, everyone's been fired? And they're not reporting.
That only
boy.
happened.
I was gonna say, I wish. Sometimes I wish that incompetence would get fired, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yep. Well, it did at Boeing.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, let's just say I'm lucky that incompetent isn't immediately fireable.
Sweden? Yeah. There's a term in Japan, by the way, complete digression, when people are quite useless but a permanent employee. There's a term called window watcher, which is where the company puts so waits until they retire.
I like that. I used to talk about the vice president of looking out the window as a joke.
That's
Yep.
exactly it.
People who have those middle management kind of jobs or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it sounds like a perfect job. Very tempting.
I'd be bored to tears. I'm sorry.
Well, I presume that there's a special skill set that some parties have where they can go into a like zone. Right.
Yeah.
No comment.
No comment. The next one, fourth issue today, is supplied software. And Andrew was going to ask if the phrase distributes could be changed to distributes or makes available. And that's about SaaS products. So really talking about SaaS supply.
That was along the lines of our discussion when we were talking about the new licenses that you have to give away all of your intellectual property if you run it on a publicly available server.
Yeah, some licenses like
It used to be the Faro license, but now there's the business source license, and the Faro people came up with a server side license.
Yes.
Yeah, it's SSPL. SSPL is the service side public license.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, so
recently, if I remember correct, even I think, yeah, some of the prominent open source providers now resorting to the source available license. You have the recent one with Redis, right?
Oh,
They
yeah.
just released RSAL. Yeah.
yeah, that's the way I feel about all those package managers. They
Well,
don't even, they just
I'm
claim
sorry,
it's
Ted.
open source. They just claim it's open source, but they don't say the source is available, and they don't make it available.
Yep.
I was gonna say, it looks like they are having the discussion I was about to have. And I'd have to look at the licenses again, but it sounds like they all, if I recall, they all define distributes as their own, accessible over a network. So we wouldn't have to change our definition in the spec. It could still include all the current network copyleft licenses. Of course, that may change in the future, but looks
Yeah,
like
but
Hans brought something up about what it means in the law and under approach. So I tend to agree with Hans' argument here.
So this would essentially say that what is distribution belongs in your domain, what your legal staff says, that we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, it's exactly as Hans said, distribution can be different stuff. So changing distributes to distributes or makes available might be us narrowing it down, because distributes, I suppose, could be interpreted as makes available in certain contexts.
Yeah, it's not necessary for us to change. It may, that may change in the future when some other network copyleft license comes out, but I think it's accurate as of today. I guess we could put a pin in it because, maybe by the time we go to make an update to the spec, there'll be
Yeah.
some new license out there.
Okay, so maybe we can say this. Oh, I'm trying to think of a thing. The question of whether replacing the term,
yeah, and get the or out of there.
yeah, maybe with distributes or makes available.
Right. Yeah, because for a lot of the licenses that are the original copyleft licenses, it was distributes was always the kind of the keyword with the GNU Foundation.
Yep.
But it's really started being stretched with some of those new licenses, at least from a technical perspective, as to how you're supposed to handle them.
Yes. So it seems like the key question is whether the interpretation of distribution
includes
Yeah.
making available. Yep. You agree with that, Mary?
Yeah.
And that's essentially sticks a pin in it. I suppose then our question is, this is undetermined and this has been open since 2019. Given that we can't find consensus, should we just close this off?
I think we could and just say, as of now, it's the spec is still accurate and includes this kind of. Well, I suppose anyone, even you, if you didn't have network copyleft in your SAS, you could still do this process, right?
Yep.
So it's not a necessary change. So I would say maybe that's the little argument for waiting.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, that's why I was trying to get that one picked off early because it's so old.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can reopen it.
But a lot of things have changed since he wrote it in 2019.
Yep.
Wow, that is an old one. Oh my gosh.
I
Mhm.
know, 5 years.
It's like 28 in dog years or something. Software years.
Okay. That's actually a good point. All right. We're done. It's closed. And I think
It's
there's an invitation to reopen if necessary, but the lack of consensus is a good indicator that perhaps our energy needs to go elsewhere.
Mhm.
The last one, I think, is what we call blame Shane. Because there's a proposal, and I'll just put this into the chat. Okay, so the basic proposal is related to, where is it? Security assurance. And there was a question of quality complete SBOMs for licensing or security. So what should be included for quality?
I think that should be in the SBOM spec.
Yep, absolutely. This is a sideways discussion that we might want to just close off and send back to them, which is where we actually got. But we got an additional comment in, which I wanted to flag. So the telco spec started talking about what could be a quality aspect. And we just noted in a conversation that we talk about SBOMs in the security spec. Telco's looking at what is a quality SBOM, but telco's we identified a potential challenge with what telco's doing because they're specific to SPDX.
Mm-hmm.
So we were suggesting to make things more agnostic, and we could make an adjustment to make things agnostic. Actually, there was something here which doesn't seem to be included, which was that 2 tags, package license concluded and package license declared, exist in SPDX. There's only 1 tag in Cyclone DX. And we were just chatting about the way that being SPDX specific could make people say that, oh, the other SBOM format is not regarded as quality, but it is quality. It's what I use. And we were just saying, making things agnostic might be useful. We should probably tell the telco people to do that for their guide. And our next step was to, maybe tell them to, why don't you have a look at SPDX Lite, have a look at the quality thing, and so on and so forth. Right. Yes, our conclusion. We take this conversation to the telco people, and we keep a conversation open with SPDX to see what they're doing, etc., etc. So far, so easy. Licensing spec mentions SBOM. Security spec mentions SBOM. Conversation just happened to occur about what is SBOM quality. We made a note that telco is looking at SBOM quality. We made a note, hang on, they're looking at it with only SPDX. Maybe we should make a few suggestions for them to be agnostic over in SBOM quality and the telco work group. And that's it. Sounds closed. But then we got a comment in from Kubota-san. And Kubota-san is basically saying that, yeah, SBOM is talked about 3 times in the security assurance spec, defining what an SBOM is, saying that an SBOM should be used, and that there should be component records. And what Kubota-san was saying is that, and I think he misunderstood what we were doing.
Yeah.
Kubota-san was saying, does this mean we plan to add mandatory things to security assurance? And the answer was no, not at all. We were just chatting about it. It came up. The proposal that we had is not to add something to the security spec, like what's a quality SBOM, but that someone else is doing that, the telco group making a guide, and we should suggest to them to be more agnostic, not SPDX. Because potentially a misunderstanding that we were going to add mandatory fields to our security spec, potentially adding mandatory fields to an ISO standard. Kubota-san was just saying that he thinks that SPDX Lite plus the SPDX security profile is enough to determine a quality SBOM. So long story short, we happened to get into the discussion of what would be a quality SBOM anyway. We noticed that our telco workgroup was doing that. We noticed they were SPDX specific. We determined that we should probably say to them, how about not being SPDX specific, because there are other standards in the market. And our action item was to go off and do that, more specifically for Shane to go off and do that.
Right.
And meanwhile, Kubota-san, I think, had a misread of it. He thought we were going to add quality SBOM stuff to the security assurance spec, and I think he wanted to jump in and say, don't do anything new. There's pre-existing work in SPDX, which is an adjacent but separate discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So my proposal is that this comment is actually not commenting on what we were planning to do. And perhaps this issue should be closed off with a note that we do not plan to describe a quality SBOM in security. We do plan to ask the telco workgroup to be generic rather than SPDX specific. And Jimmy just noted in the comments that's already on their radar. And then this issue itself would be closed off because it represents a conversation open, addressed, and closed with no further action required in terms of our specification.
If you allow, I could just give some further background on the telco stuff.
Yeah, of course. I think the chairman is allowed to do that if he feels like it.
Well, that's the benefit, right? So yes, there was a discussion early on SPDX versus generic, and we said, okay, let's just now our biggest pain point is the fact that we don't have any agreement at all on what is a quality SBOM and what should it contain. So the easiest path forward is for us just to take SPDX as the example, because that's what traction in the telco industry currently. No one is asking for Cyclone DX. So let's just solve our problem with SPDX first. Then once we have that, we can translate that over into Cyclone DX, or generic requirements essentially, and we can then say, okay, as long as you live up to these, and we're fine, and then we can easily in our respective contracts with suppliers and customers state SPDX or the equivalent that lives up to these quality requirements that is in this specification. So that was the thinking, that let's solve a short-term problem with just solidifying SPDX as what has momentum in the telco industry, and then from there we'll make it generic. We're not quite at the point where it will be generic yet, but I think that's sort of for the next version, and it certainly aligns with some of the plans that we are talking about for how do we bring this spec forward and push it into something like the Open RAN specification, and saying that, pointing them towards the OpenChain specification for for like telco SBOM or quality SBOM. So that's the short summary of those discussions. But feel free here in the comment to point out and ask us to make it generic. I think that would be very nice. It would sort of also address Kubota-san's confusion, and it would be a nice validation for the telco group.
Yeah, if from both the ISO and the ANSI specification groups that I work with, there's a lot of pushback about SBOMs and what makes a quality SBOM right now. And I've been championing somebody to start working on developing a specification for SBOMs, but they say it's still too early in the life of an SBOM to try and standardize right now one of the two top competitors in that market as the standard. And I think that you're right. I think that it really is gonna take somebody putting together something that has a common thread to the best out of both worlds and start there with the discussion. Because even the government's not in agreement. And in the US, they're the primary customer for SBOMs in their mind. And so they think that they're setting the requirements, and their requirements are pretty thin. If you wanted to say that the executive order was driving the commonality here in the United States about what is a quality SBOM, it'd be pretty weak.
Yeah,
Because
I agree. That's sort of the need we saw that needed to be filled with the telco work group stuff on SBOMs. That's what they had was actually kind of thin, and there was a lot of room for sort of further specificity or further clarifications. So I
Right.
fully agree with you.
Yeah, and when people use either one of the formats today in delivering an SBOM, they're only using a fraction of what's actually available and completely omitting the licensing information if they go by the bare minimums that are called out in the executive order. So to me, that's probably just as important as telling somebody what the vulnerabilities are, because if you don't know what the license requirements are, how do you know if you can use it?
Exactly.
I totally agree. Yeah, Chris has valid point. So one of the challenges we even have that with the minimal NTIAs, as you rightly pointed out, Chris. I mean, many of those attributes, primarily around licensing and license-related information, they are not mandated. However, the way at least organizations look at this for the time being is they are using these obviously as space fillers, but it's primarily those mandatory attributes, or like even the license information is driven from the business customer needs. So in some cases, the customer is the one who is putting the emphasis on having some of these attributes as mandatory, and organizations obviously take a note to that. Even though that may not be a mandated requirement from the regulatory bodies, so to speak, but we end up still look at what customers are really looking at, and obviously in many of those cases, depending on the region where the customers are from, there is a greater emphasis on that the third-party dependencies licensing info.
Now we've just hit time, so I'm afraid we must end there, but we can of course come back to this general topic. However, on the very specifics about this open issue, it looks like we're ready to close. We provide feedback to telco, please make things more generic. And meanwhile, the secondary thread that SPDX plus security covers open source security assurance, that's valid, but it's adjacent. It's not going to change the recommendation we provide to telco. If there's no objection to that, I will close this issue.
I like it.
Alrighty. closed. We are over time, so I just have to say thank you to everyone who's been here. Chris, as always, all of the fun available from our gang here. Prasad, Mary, and Jimmy, thank you so much. Mary 1 and Mary 2 are both on the line. I got to thank both of you.
That's right. Can't thank one without thanking both of them.
Indeed.
We got a lot done today, you guys. Good
We
job.
really did. Thank you. Take care all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Very
Bye-bye.
informative.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.